What happens when the galaxy's most fragile creatures become its deadliest defenders? For centuries, the hive consumed everything in its path. Empires, fleets, entire civilizations vanished into silence. No one could stop them. No one dared to even hope. And then, humanity arrived, a species born in fire, raised in endless war, carrying scars older than some stars. To the galaxy, we were weak, flesh too soft, lifespans too short, spirits too reckless. But to the hive, we were something far worse. We were the first prey that fought back, and the only enemy they would never forget. The galaxy did not fall all at once. It unraveled in whispers, in pieces, in the quiet horror of systems that simply stopped transmitting. At first, the disappearance of colonies was blamed on pirates, rogue storms, navigation failures. But then the pattern spread, too fast, too deliberate. Star after star went dark, and the silence was heavier than any war. The hive never announced itself. It didn't send demands, it didn't negotiate. It didn't even acknowledge that its victims were alive. It simply consumed. A tide of living ships, chitinous and vast, drifting like a cancer across the void. They didn't conquer in the traditional sense. There was no government left to bend the knee to them, no survivors left to enslave. Entire worlds were reduced to husks, every resource stripped bare, every life extinguished. They ate and they moved on. For the elder races of the galaxy, it was the culmination of every nightmare they had ever dismissed. The Valorians, ancient and proud, remembered 1,000 wars and thought themselves prepared. Their fleets evaporated in a single campaign. The Zorathi swore their war beasts were the pinnacle of evolution. The hive devoured them in days. Even the Council of Unity, once the galactic balance of power, crumbled under the sheer weight of the swarm. It became clear to all, this was not an enemy that could be bargained with. This was not even an enemy in the conventional sense. The hive was hunger, given form. Fear spread faster than the swarm itself. Allies turned on each other, hoarding resources, abandoning border worlds, retreating into deeper space. No one wanted to fight. No one wanted to be noticed. Survival meant hiding, at least for a while. But the hive was endless. Hiding was simply postponing the inevitable. In the midst of this spiral of despair, humanity was almost overlooked. They were newcomers on the galactic stage, barely 2 centuries into faster-than-light travel. Their fleets were small, their colonies scattered, their politics chaotic. To the elder races, humanity was insignificant, an upstart civilization with more ambition than wisdom. Certainly not a power worth considering in a war that was erasing entire empires. But the hive noticed them. It noticed everyone. When the first tendrils of the swarm brushed against human colonies, they were expected to fold in days. Soft-blooded primates against a predator that had annihilated species older, stronger, and far more advanced. The galaxy waited for the inevitable transmission. Screams, silence, then nothing. But the silence never came. Instead, something unexpected happened. Human worlds fought back. They didn't win, not in the conventional sense, but they didn't collapse either. Where other species fled at the sight of the swarm, humanity dug in. Their fleets fought to the last ship. Their soldiers burned themselves alive rather than be taken. Entire populations refused evacuation, arming themselves with weapons so primitive they should have been useless. And yet they made the hive bleed. Not much, not enough to stop the advance, but enough to prove something vital. The hive could be hurt. It was a revelation that shook the surviving civilizations. No one had ever drawn blood from the swarm. No one had ever stood their ground. And yet here was humanity, small and fragile, refusing to surrender, forcing the hive to notice them. For the first time, the unstoppable wave hesitated, not because it could not feed, but because for the first time in its existence, it had met resistance that felt different. The galaxy watched in disbelief. And in that moment, a dangerous question began to spread, whispered in council chambers, carried on secret transmissions. If humans can survive this, what else are they capable of? Because in the shadow of the silent terror, hope had been extinguished. But hope, in its strangest and most terrifying form, had just returned, wearing a human face. The first hive specimen was captured by accident. A shattered tendril ship drifted near the ruins of Arcturus Station, its hull broken but its core still pulsing with life. A coalition salvage crew dared to approach, believing it dead. They were wrong. When the carcass was hauled into containment, something inside began to move. The screaming didn't stop for 12 hours. By the time the scientists regained control, half the crew was gone, and the survivors would never again sleep without nightmares. The galaxy had its first close look at the hive. The specimen was unlike anything recorded in galactic history. Its biology shifted endlessly, cells rewriting themselves, organs dissolving and reforming, limbs sprouting and retracting like weapons grown on instinct. Dissection revealed no central brain, no fixed anatomy. It was a machine made of flesh designed not for survival, but for relentless adaptation. Where it touched metal, corrosion spread. Where it touched flesh, infection followed. One scientist described it simply: it doesn't live, it endures, and it endures by consuming everything that does. For most civilizations, the discovery was a death sentence written in biology. If the hive could adapt endlessly, then there was no weapon that could stop it. The Valorians closed their research labs, calling the study pointless suicide. The Council ordered the remains destroyed, believing the risk too great. To them, the only safe hive specimen was ash, but humans were different. They didn't see inevitability. They saw opportunity. The captured organism was transferred to a human research outpost orbiting Callisto, where the brightest biologists, engineers, and tacticians gathered around it. Others watched in horror as humanity began poking, prodding, testing, studying not just how the hive killed, but how it learned. Every failed experiment, every adaptation the creature made, only sharpened human resolve. If it evolved a toxin, they devised a neutralizer. If it grew armor, they designed weapons that punched deeper. Each time the hive shifted, humanity shifted faster. What the rest of the galaxy called reckless, humans called necessary. And soon, their methods drew attention. Reports filtered back from the front lines. Human soldiers were using weapons that no other species dared field. Incendiary plasma that cooked hive biomass alive. Sonic cannons that shattered their nervous clusters. Even chemical agents outlawed by every galactic treaty. Humans dusted them off, refined them, and unleashed them with terrifying precision. The hive bled. And more importantly, it hesitated. For the first time, the swarm encountered prey that learned as quickly as it did. Prey that didn't just resist, but struck back with equal savagery. Allied commanders dismissed it at first as luck or desperation or human madness. But then the numbers came in. Battle after battle, where humans fought, survival rates were higher. Losses were still brutal, but not absolute. It was enough to force the galaxy to look again at the species they had dismissed as irrelevant. The soft-skinned newcomers, the fragile bipeds with their short lives and endless wars, were staring into the jaws of the greatest terror in history, and they were not blinking. In the shadowed halls of alien governments, arguments raged. Some declared humanity was too dangerous, that their brutality would one day rival the hive itself. Others insisted they were the galaxy's only chance. But beneath the politics, one truth whispered louder than any council decree. Humanity had drawn blood from the monster, and monsters, no matter how vast, no matter how ancient, no matter how unstoppable, could be killed. The hive had met its first real enemy, and the galaxy was about to learn what it meant to fight beside the children of Earth. The galaxy had always whispered about humanity's strange temperament. Even before the Hive War, when humans were still considered minor players, their reputation preceded them. Volatile, unpredictable, prone to extremes. To most species, it was a curiosity. To others, a warning. But when the hive appeared, that reputation transformed into something far more terrifying. Where the Valorians built fleets to preserve order, humans built theirs to win wars. Where the Zarathi raised their young in carefully regulated environments, humans thrived in chaos, adapting to deserts, tundras, and oceans that would kill most species in minutes. Where others prized peace, humans seemed to sharpen themselves on conflict. Their history was a blood-soaked ledger stretching back thousands of years, empires rising and falling in fire, weapons evolving from sharpened stone to planet-cracking warheads in the blink of an evolutionary eye. Other species spoke of their pasts in terms of art, exploration, philosophy. Humans spoke of wars, and the lesson carved into them by every generation was simple: survival requires violence. This truth made other civilizations recoil. But against the hive, it became humanity's greatest weapon. When soldiers from across the galaxy faced the swarm, many froze. Their minds balked at the endless tide, the unfeeling hunger, the futility of resistance. But human soldiers did not freeze. They leaned into the chaos as if some deep ancestral memory recognized the hive for what it was. Just another predator. Humanity had always lived beside predators. They had always fought tooth and nail, even when the odds were hopeless. Wolves, tigers, plagues, famine. Earth had thrown every terror imaginable at its children, and still they endured. And so, when the hive came, humanity simply treated it as the next trial. Bigger, yes. Deadlier, yes. But still a trial. And trials in human history were meant to be overcome. Alien commanders couldn't understand it. They watched humans execute brutal tactics that defied every convention. Soldiers fighting with broken limbs, refusing retreat. Engineers rigging starships to ram hive carriers, turning themselves into guided missiles. Civilians strapping bombs to shuttles rather than be consumed. To the council races, this looked like madness. To humans, it was instinct. The difference was philosophical as much as physical. Other species viewed survival as preservation, maintaining what they had, protecting what they loved. Humanity viewed survival as conquest, overcoming whatever stood in their path no matter the cost. It was this mindset that unsettled the galaxy most of all. Because the hive was not just being resisted, it was being studied, dissected, outmatched by creatures who had been fighting wars long before they had discovered the stars. For every adaptation the hive made, humanity had an answer. For every weakness revealed, they drove the knife deeper. And they didn't fight clean. Chemical weapons banned for centuries. Humans used them. Nuclear warheads detonated inside atmosphere. Humans didn't hesitate. Viral agents that burned through biomass. Humans deployed them with precision. Where other races saw taboo, humanity saw tools. Against an enemy that recognized no law but hunger, they chose to honor no law but victory. One Violorian admiral put it best. You brought fire to a galaxy that had long grown cold. You do not fear the darkness, humans. You are the darkness. For the first time, the hive faced something that looked like itself in the mirror. A species that could not be deterred, that grew sharper with every battle, that refused to break no matter the cost. And in the hushed corridors of alien parliaments, one chilling thought began to circulate. If humanity can fight the hive this way, what happens when the hive is gone? Because the truth was clear to all who dared look. Humanity was not just surviving the silent terror. Humanity was thriving within it. The hive had never known hesitation. For centuries it devoured without pause, its hunger infinite, its swarms unstoppable. But at the edges of human space, something strange happened. The advance slowed. Not stopped, not defeated, but slowed. Like an ocean wave breaking against jagged cliffs, the hive surged forward, only to be broken into spray by the defenders who refused to yield. The galaxy took notice. Whispers grew louder. If the soft-skinned bipeds could do this with scattered colonies and outdated fleets, what might they achieve if they truly unleashed their strength? That answer came with the awakening of the human war armada. It began in the shipyards of Luna, Mars, and the Jovian moons. Construction projects that had been underway long before the hive appeared. Humanity had always prepared for war, even when there was no war to fight. Every nation on Earth had poured resources into a defense initiative called simply the contingency. Most aliens had laughed when they heard of it, dismissing it as paranoia from a young species. After all, what threat could possibly justify building fleets larger than entire empires possessed? Now the galaxy understood. From the shipyards rose dreadnoughts the size of cities, armored in alloys that shimmered like obsidian, their hulls bristling with weaponry. Carriers capable of launching swarms of strike craft, each one piloted by humans bred for speed, aggression, and recklessness. Siege cruisers carrying payloads outlawed by every treaty in the Council's history. And at the center of it all, the flagships, leviathans designed not to merely hold the line, but to burn entire hive clusters to ash. When the Armada deployed for the first time, the galaxy trembled. Allied observers were invited to witness the departure from Earth orbit. What they saw defied every assumption they had made about humanity. Hundreds of warships emerged in synchronized formation, their engines burning blue-white, their comms silent. No speeches, no declarations. Just the cold efficiency of a species that had already accepted what was required. This is not conquest. one human admiral told the assembly, her voice steady, her eyes like iron. This is survival, and survival requires overkill. To the galaxy, it felt like watching predators awaken after a long sleep. For centuries, humanity had hidden its claws behind diplomacy, exploration, and trade. But the Hive had pulled back the curtain, and the galaxy now saw the truth. Humans had always been preparing for war, always waiting for the enemy that would test them, and the Hive was about to find out what that meant. The Armada's first campaign began at Vega Prime, a system already half digested by the swarm. Hive spires pierced the atmosphere, feeding on the planet's molten core. Other fleets had attempted rescues here before. Every attempt ended in silence. When humanity arrived, the expectation was simple. Another futile gesture. Another dead Armada. Instead, the stars lit with fury. Human dreadnoughts opened fire with weapons that turned Hive biomass into incandescent vapor. Carriers unleashed fighters that dove into the swarm like hornets, their pilots laughing over comms even as they flew into suicide runs. Orbital strikes rained fire on the Hive spires, cracking them apart like brittle shells. The Hive fought back with overwhelming force, their living ships swarming in endless numbers. But for every tendril that struck, humans struck back harder. For every ship consumed, 3 more surged forward, and then came the shockwave. The detonation of a human-designed singularity charge, a weapon thought theoretical. Space itself buckled, dragging a Hive carrier into oblivion. For the first time in its long existence, the Hive lost not just biomass, but entire fleets. The galaxy gasped. The Hive recoiled. Humanity pressed forward. The Armada was no longer just a fleet. It was a message, a promise, a declaration to the universe. Humanity would not only fight, it would endure. It would burn worlds if necessary. It would become the very storm the Hive had once been. And as the last Hive spire on Vega Prime collapsed in fire, one truth became undeniable. The galaxy had never seen war until now. The Hive did not retreat quietly. It never had, and it never would. For every world lost, 100 more tendrils of its endless body reached outward, searching for new prey. Vega Prime had been a shock, but the swarm adapted. It always adapted, and this time, it gathered in numbers never before witnessed. What followed was the first true clash of titans, the Armada against the swarm. The battlefield was the Leuten Corridor, a stretch of space that served as a vital passage for trade and defense between dozens of allied systems. If the Hive took it, the inner colonies would be exposed. If humanity held it, the galaxy might breathe a little longer. Both sides knew the stakes. Both sides came ready for annihilation. The Hive arrived first. Sensors screamed as their ships spilled from the void in numbers that defied comprehension. Living titans of chitin and muscle. Carriers that birthed smaller horrors by the thousands. Swarms of drones that filled the stars like locusts. The sky itself darkened as their sheer presence blotted out starlight. To most species, the sight alone was enough to shatter morale. It was not a fleet. It was a plague, infinite and inevitable. Then the humans came. The Armada emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Hundreds of ships aligned like blades drawn from a scabbard. Dreadnoughts led the charge, their hulls gleaming black against the void. Carriers released their wings of strikecraft, the engines of thousands of fighters burning bright as they formed into attack swarms of their own. No speeches, no hesitation, just the steady, silent preparation of warriors who knew they were staring into the abyss and intended to drag it down with them. The clash began with light. Hive biocannons vomited plasma across the void, streaks of green fire lancing toward human lines. But the dreadnought shields held, bending and shimmering under the onslaught. Then came humanity's reply. Railguns thundered, hurling slugs at near-light speed. Each impact split Hive ships apart, tearing through flesh and bone as though they were paper. Missiles detonated in blossoms of white fire, vaporizing swarms by the hundreds. Fighters dove into the chaos, weaving between enemy drones, unleashing bursts of plasma and nuclear-tipped warheads at point-blank range. Victory in the Leuten Corridor was a turning point, but it was not the end. The Hive did not simply bleed, it recoiled. Humanity knew that if they let it regenerate, it would return with greater ferocity. For the Armada, holding the line was not enough. They needed to strike at the heart of the beast. Thus the unthinkable order was given: board the Hive ships. Until then, no species had dared it. Hive vessels were nightmares, living fortresses where the walls themselves were alive, where air was poison, and the corridors shifted like a labyrinth. To step inside one was to step into the jaws of a predator. But humanity had never cared much for rules of survival. If the swarm would not break, then humanity would break it from the inside. The mission began with silence. Dropships clung to the sides of the dreadnought Iron Vow, their hulls bristling with breaching charges and grappling arms. Inside, platoons of Marines sat strapped into crash harnesses, armor sealed, visors glowing faintly in the dim light. Their weapons were unlike any standard rifles. They were flamethrowers, micro-nukes, plasma lances. Tools not just for killing enemies, but for scouring infestations. Sergeant Reyes, a veteran of 10 campaigns, looked over his squad. None spoke. They didn't need to. Every man and woman aboard knew the odds. Boarding hive ships was a death sentence. The question was not whether they would die. It was how many they would take with them. A signal flashed across the comms. Launch. The dropships detached, engines igniting in silent bursts of fire as they streaked across the void. Ahead loomed the hive carrier, a monstrosity kilometers long, its chitinous hide glistening with the faint shimmer of organic shielding. Its maw opened, birthing swarms of drones into the battle. The dropships dodged, weaving through a storm of enemy fire, one by one disappearing into the black wound of its hull. Then came the thunder. Breaching charges detonated, tearing jagged holes into the hive's living skin. Dropships slammed into place, locking onto the wounds they'd created. Ramp doors hissed open and Marines surged into the breach, weapons blazing. The hive interior was a nightmare. The air reeked of acid and blood. Pulsating walls throbbed with veins carrying bioluminescent fluid, casting everything in a sickly glow. The floor was slick, alive, twitching beneath their boots. And the swarm was waiting. Drones descended from the ceiling in a chittering storm. Acid spit seared through armor, claws tore at shields. Marines answered with fire. Flamethrowers roared, turning walls and enemies alike into shrieking infernos. Grenades exploded, shattering entire chambers into pools of gore. Plasma rifles cut glowing arcs through the tide of monsters. Every step forward was bought with blood. Push! To the core! Reyes bellowed, voice amplified through the comms. His squad advanced in tight formation, shields overlapping, covering one another in the storm. Behind them, engineers planted demolition charges along the walls, ready to rip the hive vessel apart from within. The deeper they went, the stranger it became. Corridors twisted unnaturally, shifting as if the ship itself resisted them. Doors closed like jaws, forcing squads to cut their way through with plasma cutters. Parasites dropped from the ceiling, latching onto armor and pumping acid until soldiers ripped them free with knives. The hive adapted to every weapon, spawning new drones in minutes. But humans adapted faster. At one choke point, the swarm unleashed a beast larger than a tank, armored in obsidian plating. Its roar shook the chamber as it charged, tearing through barricades like paper. Marines poured fire into it to no effect. Then Corporal Vega, mortally wounded but unflinching, sprinted forward with a micro-nuke strapped to his chest. "Tell my kids humanity fights back," he roared, slamming into the beast, the chamber lit with white fire. When the smoke cleared, the monster was gone, and so was Vega. The path forward lay open, hours blurred into carnage. Squad after squad pushed deeper, leaving trails of destruction behind them. Finally, Reyes and what remained of his unit reached the heart, the neurocore, a pulsating organ the size of a cathedral, beating with the will of the hive. "Plant everything we've got," Reyes ordered, his voice hoarse. Engineers set charges along the core's base while Marines held the line. Drones poured into the chamber like a flood. Men and women fell, ripped apart, burned alive, but not before firing their last shots, not before making the enemy pay. When the final charge was armed, Reyes triggered his comm. Armada command. "This is Reyes, the core is lit, tell my family." He paused, staring at the seething swarm rushing toward him. "Tell them humanity didn't bow." He pressed the detonator. The neurocore erupted, tearing the hive carrier apart from the inside. Across the battlefield, the swarm convulsed. Their coordination faltered. For the first time in history, a hive warship had been not just stopped, but gutted by the prey it sought to consume. The cost was total. Few Marines made it back, but their sacrifice shattered the illusion of hive invincibility. Humanity had not only stood against the swarm, It had bled it from within, and the galaxy trembled at the realization. The destruction of the hive carrier echoed across the stars, not merely as a tactical victory, but as a myth reborn in real time. For centuries, the hive had been unstoppable. Worlds fell in silence, fleets vanished without resistance, and survivors whispered of inevitable extinction. No species had ever pierced the heart of a hive vessel. No one had even tried. Until humanity. The news rippled outward from the Leyton corridor like a shockwave. At first, it was disbelieved. Reports of Marines storming hive corridors sounded like madness, exaggerations conjured by propaganda. But then came the footage, grainy combat feeds ripped from helmet cams, broadcast by human command without hesitation. The galaxy watched. They saw Sergeant Reyes's squad storming into flesh-lined chambers, flamethrowers carving paths through nightmares. They saw Corporal Vega's last charge, the blinding white flash of his sacrifice and the monstrous hive beast torn apart in the blast. They saw the neurocore detonate, the colossal carrier shuddering and splitting like a wounded leviathan. The proof was undeniable. Humanity had not just resisted. Humanity had invaded the invader. In the great halls of the Tharkan Unity, scholars and warlords gathered around shimmering hollow displays. The Tharkans, a proud reptilian people whose fleets had once challenged the hive and been annihilated, sat in stunned silence. Their high marshal broke it with a single word, his voice gravelly with disbelief. Impossible. A junior officer, scales shimmering with youth, countered softly. And yet, they did it. The humans. They did what we could not. Across the chamber, warlords who had long abandoned the notion of fighting the hive straightened in their seats. Hope was a dangerous weapon, and for the first time in generations, it was theirs to wield again. On the crystalline world of Irkoth, the insectoid Cathari held their conclave in a hive spire taller than mountains. To them, humanity had always been an anomaly, too reckless, too volatile, too quick to burn themselves for victory. But as they studied the human victory, their queen's wings hummed with resonance. They sacrifice without hesitation, she observed. They adapt faster than flesh can grow. This is the predator the hive was never meant to face. Her advisors exchanged uneasy clicks. The Cathari had survived by fleeing, by bending to the hive's path and avoiding it where possible. But now the thought arose, if they allied with these humans, perhaps survival could mean more than running. Even in the far reaches of the Katali archives, where ancient machine intelligences cataloged every known war, the event was recorded not as a battle but as a paradigm shift. One archivist AI wrote in its cold, unfeeling script, "For the first time in recorded history, a prey species has become predator." The balance has shifted, and yet not all reactions were hopeful. In the hidden council chambers of the Vayari Consortium, merchant princes fumed. The hive's terror had been profitable. It kept weaker races dependent on their fleets for protection, their coffers full of tribute. Now humanity threatened to unravel that balance. "They have turned fear into a weapon," one prince spat, jeweled fingers curling around a goblet. "If others rally behind them, our power wanes. We cannot allow these upstarts to dictate the new order." Thus, even as humanity earned respect, it also earned envy, and enemies cloaked not in chitin, but in silk and gold. Meanwhile, on Earth itself, humanity wept and roared in equal measure. Cities lit candles for the Marines who never returned. Names etched into memorial walls that stretched for kilometers. But at the same time, the skies thundered with fireworks. Crowds filling streets, chanting the names of the fallen like heroes of legend. Children played boarding Marines in schoolyards, wooden sticks in hand, shouting battle cries. Veterans stood taller, their scars suddenly badges of honor. Humanity had lost much, but it had gained something priceless. The certainty that the hive could bleed, and the galaxy took notice. At the Galactic Assembly, where hundreds of species gathered in neutral space to argue, posture, and negotiate, the human delegation arrived late. When they entered, the hall fell silent. For the first time, not in mockery, not in dismissal, but in awe, Ambassador Kira Selene stood before the council, her uniform still bearing soot marks from the battlefield. She did not bow. She did not offer platitudes. She simply raised her voice and spoke. "We are not asking for your admiration. We are not asking for your thanks. We are asking only this: stand with us. Fight with us, or step aside while we burn the hive from the stars." The chamber erupted. Some cheered, some hissed. Some called for immediate alliance, others for caution. But none ignored humanity. The galaxy had changed overnight. The hive was still vast, still relentless, still an existential threat. But now, for the first time in countless millennia, it was not seen as inevitable, because a small, stubborn, reckless species from a blue world at the edge of the galaxy had proved the unthinkable. The hive was not a god. It was mortal, and mortals could be slain. The galaxy had seen many wars. Some had ended in stalemates, others in quiet surrender. But never before had there been a true counteroffensive against the hive. That word, counteroffensive, was itself alien. The hive did not retreat, and thus there had never been a chance to strike back. Until now, humanity changed everything. After the carrier's destruction, momentum shifted. It was not yet victory, but it was possibility, and possibility spread faster than fear. One by one, species that had once cowered in isolation answered humanity's call. Not all joined. Some feared, some schemed. But enough stepped forward that for the first time in millennia, the galaxy began to assemble something more than a desperate defense, an alliance. The War Council convened aboard the human flagship Eternal Resolve. Representatives from a dozen species filled the chamber. Their forms strange and varied: towering reptilians, crystalline insectoids, sleek machine constructs, even nomadic starfarers who had never before pledged to fight in another's war. And at the head of the table sat Admiral Juno Cade, her presence commanding despite the wear etched into her face. "The hive is not infinite," she said, voice echoing across the chamber. "It adapts, but so do we. We have proved it can bleed. Now we must prove it can break." She gestured to the star map above the table, where hive-controlled systems glowed a malignant red. At their center pulsed a massive cluster, the nest world, spawning grounds of the swarm. "We will not strike the heart. Not yet," Cade continued. "That would be suicide. Instead, we take their lifeblood. Supply nodes, breeding vats, relay hives, every world that feeds their war machine. We carve a path of fire through their arteries until their heart starves." A murmur rippled through the council. For centuries, the hive had been the hunter. Now humanity proposed to turn the galaxy into the hunter instead. The first step was daring, an assault on Charon's Maw, a hive fortress system that served as a command relay for swarms across an entire sector. The Maw had crushed fleets before. To take it would be to rip out the swarm's eyes in that region. Plans formed quickly. The Tharkans offered shock troops, their massive reptilian frames perfect for heavy boarding. The Cathari provided bioresistant serums to counteract the hive's toxins. Human engineers shared reactor overload tactics and breaching protocols refined in blood. Even the aloof machine archivists pledged drone swarms, guided by cold algorithms optimized for hive eradication. It was not a perfect alliance. Arguments broke out. Species mistrusted one another. Old grudges flared. But through it all, humanity remained the spine. Their reckless defiance, their willingness to throw themselves into the fire, bound the coalition with something no one else had possessed in centuries: belief. The Armada prepared. Shipyards blazed day and night, welding new hulls and repairing scarred veterans. Fleets drilled in joint maneuvers. Human captains barking orders alongside alien commanders learning to fight as one. Marines trained in brutal simulations of hive interiors, cycling through every horror cataloged from previous battles. Some broke under the strain. Most hardened. On Earth, billions volunteered. Farmers, students, miners, scientists all offered themselves to the fight. Humanity had always been good at making war, but now it fought not only for itself but for the galaxy that had once dismissed it. When the day came, the fleet assembled like an iron storm. Hundreds of ships, human and alien alike, formed in the void before the Maw. The sight was unprecedented. A united force where once there had only been scattered prey. Admiral Cade stood on the command deck of Eternal Resolve, watching the swarm fortress ahead. It loomed like a black wound in space, tendrils stretching for kilometers, its defenses alive and writhing. Drones poured from it in rivers, their wings catching starlight. "This is it," Cade said, voice steady. "No turning back. Today we prove to the hive that the galaxy is done running." The order went out. The counteroffensive began. The battle unfolded with fury. Allied fleets surged forward, shields flaring under torrents of plasma. Human dreadnoughts opened fire with railgun barrages, ripping holes in hive lines. Tharkan war beasts launched boarding pods directly into the Maw's outer carapace, crashing through with sheer brute force. Cathari shock lances fired beams that burned through chitin like paper. For every loss, the coalition gave back twofold. For every drone that swarmed, 3 were cut down. Humanity's tactics, sacrifice, improvisation, sheer audacity, spread through the fleet like wildfire. Soon alien crews were fighting with the same reckless abandon, hurling themselves into maneuvers no computer would calculate, no strategist would approve. Chaos became their weapon. And amidst that chaos, the Hive faltered. Hours later, as the Maw split under the Coalition's relentless assault, the realization spread across every fleet, every cockpit, every Marine's mind. This was not just survival, this was victory. For the first time, the Hive had not only been resisted, not only bloodied, but beaten back by a united galaxy. And it was humanity that had made it possible. The counteroffensive had begun, and the war would never be the same. The story you've just followed is not just about war, it's about defiance. It's about a species that the galaxy overlooked, dismissed, even ridiculed. Humanity was not the strongest, not the oldest, not the wisest. But when the darkness came, they were the ones who refused to kneel. In the boarding chambers of Hive carriers, in the void of shattered corridors, in the fire of counteroffensives, they proved something no alien had ever dared to believe, that the Hive was not inevitable. That monsters could bleed, that nightmares could be fought, and now the galaxy stands at a threshold. Every civilization must choose. Continue to cower in the shadows, waiting for the Hive to consume them piece by piece, or rise alongside humanity and burn a path of fire through the swarm. This is where you come in. If you felt the fire in these words, if your blood surged when Reyes pressed the detonator, if your heart thundered when Admiral Cade said there was no turning back, then don't just let this be another story you scroll past. Share it, spread it, carry it like a banner into your circles, your communities, your platforms, because stories like these are more than entertainment. They are fuel. They remind us that courage is contagious, that resistance is never futile, and that even in the darkest night, one spark can light a blaze that changes everything. Humanity's fight against the Hive is not over. And neither is ours. Stand, share, and spread the fire, because legends are not told, they are built. The Armada is waiting. Will you join?